Okay, stream's up. How did it go?
So not like super productive or anything. I did get some stuff done, which was good. But yeah, but otherwise I've sort of focused on some other stuff in life. I did manage to get more of the thing that I was talking about, the like draft, sort of reprocessing a badly written paper thing. I've gotten about halfway through that, which I had a little sort of issues with some bits in terms of doing stuff like outlining and things. So might be some questions about like when someone, like if you're doing an outline of a sentence that someone wrote that's bad, yeah, how do you deal with it? So that double listing thing should be fixed if you refresh now. Otherwise, I was thinking we can finish off the tree thing from last session. And then if you've, I know we were talking about doing one of your trees, or doing one of your discussions, doing a tree of that. That might be
Yeah, we
good as
could
well, because
try
I feel
that.
like, yeah, my discussion was, well, it had issues, of course. Yeah. Otherwise, I have started reading and stuff a bit. I've got to figure out how to fit it into my schedule properly and get it consistently happening. But yeah, but that's good to, feels good to start doing that. There's
Okay.
no updates to any of the LessWrong stuff, by the way. On like Tag didn't reply to any of the stuff that I posted
Okay.
a few days ago.
So, you had a few things you wanted to ask about or finish up with this stuff?
Yeah. So just going to the file for today. Yeah, so I think we didn't quite get to the end, and particularly I was wanted to talk about how I handled things at the end, because I didn't think that was like necessarily great, necessarily very good. So yeah, wanted to get your
Oh,
thoughts on that,
quick
about what I
tangent.
did. Yep.
That Mako Yas guy who said he was interested in talking with me and then didn't reply has now posted a comment in a different thread, so he wasn't just AFK.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. He didn't respond to any of my stuff either. So okay. So yeah, so particularly with the discussion, sort of finishing that off. Yeah, no, I got the incredulous is maybe the right word. Sort of. Oh, he has replied.
Tag?
Yeah. It didn't come up in my. Oh no, okay, that one did. Yeah, okay, sorry, he did reply. It
Okay.
didn't come up in the notifications thing. Didn't come up properly.
Well, this is, what do you think of this answer?
Well, I mean, I don't think he sort of got what I meant. In that I wasn't asking. That wasn't like an either or. It was just like, do you count yourself in this set? But uh, it's sort of like, I mean, it strikes me as unprincipled to say the least. Like what is like, he's not really answering the question.
Yeah, it seems like he doesn't want to stick his neck out by actually having a positive position that you could debate with. Which is really unfair because in a debate you have to take the ideas and do like comparative things. Like if there's a criticism that refutes both of your positions, you can't asymmetrically like say, haha, Max is wrong.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, I agree that it's unfair. It's sort of like I stick my neck out and he has some reply for things for me, but I can't like bring that back to anything.
Yeah, if his position was I don't know, that would be okay, but he's not admitting that that's his position, I don't think.
No, I agree. I don't think he's admitting much. What's oh, the footnote thing. So I'm wondering what's going on. So like I've got here, I didn't claim blah, and I put a footnote in here, sort of in, well, a way that sort of works. Anyway, then in his thing, he's actually got like a little footnote link, which has a thing that doesn't go anywhere. Like at the bottom,
Uh,
there's a footnote.
so he like copy pasted something you did and it broke it?
Yeah, it's like the footnote thing I used like works if you put it in a quote, but not if it's not in a quote or something like that. I'm not sure. But
Apparently to
yeah.
make a footnote, you put uh, exponent 1 in brackets.
Oh, okay. Oh, so um oh, interesting. So I've never found a standard way of doing like footnotes in Markdown because they're all like that's an extended syntax type thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is, yeah, it's extended syntax guide, but that is a thing. Maybe that's how LessWrong does it.
Oh, okay. Huh, cool. So um yeah. So he's sort of talking past me in the reply as well. Um
Oh, so theoretically you're right. In practice, certain unspecified people are idiots.
yeah, like
What
what
a
is that?
response. It's also like quite a non sequitur because like that particular paper could be wrong and also induction could be wrong and CR could be correct. That's like a terrible example. Wait, he used to hang out at FI? What was his identifier?
Um or either FI or Curie.us.
I'm gonna
The
ask him.
same forums as Curie is an interesting, like it's non-specific. Um
It's also quite ambiguous who the great man is. Like
yeah.
Popper? I mean, it certainly could be
Uh,
Popper, but it doesn't have to be.
No, I mean, well, I read it as referring to you because that's like Popper hasn't come up in this thing, but it's yeah, it's ambiguous.
Yeah, and it could also conceivably be DD.
Yep. Well, that's where the thread started. Um, so I mean, the what do you call it, anecdote time thing? Yeah. Oh, you can do nested quotes. How the hell does that work?
Oh, I don't know, but they have post previews. If you go to make a post instead of a comment, you can preview it as a draft and test stuff.
Oh, okay. I always, I mean, I thought the editing, like the reply editor, what do you call it? Sort of did all the preview stuff. If I quote, yeah. So if I copy that and then paste it in, then I don't
Oh, I
get.
have my editor in Markdown mode. That could be your problem. There's a setting
Oh,
instead of the rich text crap.
I had no idea.
Yeah, search for Markdown on that page. It's near the top. Activate Markdown editor.
Is there a save button? Submit. Great. Apparently I have 9 karma.
More than me. Have you seen my karma?
I think, is it still like negative 700?
Yeah.
Do you have like, so do you have like fake karma that adds, you said something about like a moderator,
Yeah, I don't
like
know if
doing
that's
something.
still there or like my karma might have gotten recalculated when they made LessWrong 2.0. I don't know how they did it because another thing is in LessWrong 1.0, votes on posts counted for 10 points. Both upvotes and downvotes on posts counted 10 and comment votes were 1. So that was like skewing the karma a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's how I got so much negative, I think. Like, if you can get a minus 20 post, that's like minus 200.
So if I copy this, oh, in Markdown, oh, okay, no, it's got like tabs or something in Markdown mode. All right, I won't reply here to test the thing, but
Okay, so where were you in the tree?
I think we were up a bit. So just looking at this, I went a bit ahead of what we ended up with. Okay, so I think I might have started on, I don't think I finished, but the thing that I linked to is the deepest one, which is 3 days ago, and it's got reality doesn't contradict itself ever. Um,
Okay.
where are we? Yeah, so I've got that one. Yep, no, reality doesn't contradict itself.
Yeah, so in general, the trees come out nicer if you paraphrase main points. But it's extra work and, it's not always worth the effort. But if you want to do it, like, carefully, that's an option. You can get, like, a smaller, more compact tree that way. You can also start this way and then make a second version based on this one.
What I've sort of like got some of the primary points and then taken out the parts that have been particularly quoted, to make a bit nicer subtrees, but that might distort the tree a bit. Okay. Yep, so I've got this post in there.
Okay, so did you have questions about any of the stuff
Yeah,
you
so the
said here?
The particular stuff was like, in regards to when I say stuff like, I get a bit more blunt. So I'm sort of more assertive in a lot of this stuff. But then the saying stuff like, I'm not convinced we can get anywhere productive continuing this discussion. Um,
Okay, I see. Yeah, so this part, reality does not contradict itself ever. I don't think that you're understanding his point. Like, that is a particular position that someone could theoretically disagree with and debate. And he's trying to say that you can have clashes between frameworks, and you need a way forward that makes sense like mutually makes sense according to both frameworks, rather than arbitrarily taking sides. Um, or
yeah,
if not mutually makes sense, then you would need something like an objective
like-
foundation that it makes sense in terms of. But you can't
yeah.
just say these two things contradict each other, I'm going to take this side. And so a statement like this appears like you're just taking sides. And it's it's a poor example that he chose, similar to your Popper paper, because it's something that you disagree with. And I think it's something he disagrees with too, so it's just like a fake example. It's
So
not something that's actually currently under dispute, but he's saying it could
um,
be under dispute.
one of the, I mean, in terms of the context, I put less effort into quoting the context like double layers here. But if you scroll up very slightly on your screen, um, you see that like where I quote him in reply to that, um, I'm giving like, or as an example, a case where uh, like the criticism is on the grounds of an internal contradiction. So I probably shouldn't have like mentioned, well, I say someone of a particular epistemology, um, which is really unnecessary. It's just a criticism on the grounds of internal contradiction. But that's why I talk about this, like because there's internal contradictions and then contradictions like between things.
I
Um,
know, but he's saying that not all frameworks object to internal contradictions.
oh, okay, yeah. Um, that's fair as like a position or whatever.
Yeah, it's quite
It
tangential though. Like
it does make it
he's
hard.
getting away from practical problems and common problems into what if there's a total skeptic nihilist who just denies everything you ever say, how do you deal with him? Which is not a good place to begin while trying to explain what your point is or how your theory works. Like it's starting with
Yeah.
a weird edge case.
Um, yeah. I mean, the other thing about that is um once heard this like somewhat in jest thing of like if you get into a discussion with a solipsist, then take them at their word and go talk to someone else. In that like they don't exist as part of their own argument, so there's no point talking to them. Which is a bit dismissive, but it's like I feel like it makes the case that it's not really a great thing to talk about. In terms of
Right, and
crazy nihilistic thing.
it's quite an uncommon position. Not many people believe it. If someone was a true believer, I'd be willing to talk with them about it and ask them some questions. But I don't like to debate this kind of thing with people who don't actually believe it and they're only raising it to try to cause trouble. At least
Yeah,
not early on in discussions. Like you could get into that kind of nuance later, when you've already like made a lot of progress on other stuff.
yeah, yep,
Although you might just want to like skip it and say read Fabric for that kind of problem.
yeah. Though you run into the problem where people don't like to read books.
Yeah, but if they don't want to read a book, then
Mm.
now you have a
How
reason
genuine can they be?
to stop talking to them that is not, I disagree with your position. It's you don't want to put effort into this.
Yeah,
Um,
yep,
which isn't, that's not like full stop an end, but you can say like, well, if you don't want to read the books, what do you propose? What's your alternative plan and why does it make more sense? And if your
yep,
alternative plan is that I rewrite the contents of the book for you in this discussion, and somehow make it shorter and better than David was able to write it, then that's not a reasonable request.
yep.
And I've tried saying that kind of thing to people, and I've never gotten a counter argument that made any sense or like addressed the issue.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So he was trying to argue like meta arguments about clashes between frameworks and mutual refutation, and then you tried to make an object point. So I think you guys are still talking past each other here.
Yep. That was like writing that was pretty reactionary in that I was essentially like it seemed like he was making the point that you shouldn't assume that contradictions are a bad thing, and moreover, that's an assumption, which seems sort of like just a silly point to make, um, which is why I responded the way I did. Um,
He's trying to say that the framework problem is very serious in a theoretical sense, which it is.
mm, yeah,
It seems like you took him as thinking that the contradictions are not bad, which he didn't say.
yeah, um,
He was trying to categorize that claim into a particular category for a reason, rather than trying to present an evaluation of that claim.
yeah. I think it's sort of been difficult to discuss things with him because it feels like uh, a lot of his points require like a few more sentences for me to understand what he's actually talking about. Um,
Yes, he's not being very helpful. He's been a bit repetitive and he keeps giving like very short versions of similar points. And you asked for an example which he never gave. And you expressed that you didn't understand what he was saying and he never said something that he could reasonably expect to clarify it for you. Then on the other hand, he's screwed up as well in in various ways, besides the brevity.
yep.
So when you write this sentence, what's your goal writing it? Like, if this is what you think, why not just not reply? What are you hoping happens next?
Well, I think it's important to like say why I wouldn't want to continue discussion, and this is like setting a like I'm not saying that I won't participate in the discussion anymore, but I'm sort of warning that that's close, I guess. In that like flagging that this does not feel productive. Um,
Well, okay, so in that case, it doesn't make sense to me to flag this and also to participate in the discussion more at the same time. Like,
yeah, okay.
you could say this, I'm not convinced this is productive. Do you disagree? Is like your whole response, plus a reason. Or you could try to do it, but you're saying like you don't think this will be productive and you're doing it. And it's hard to see what good will come of that.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like if you're really convinced that you won't get anywhere productive, you need to something has to happen to solve that problem, and then you have to proceed according to that solution. Whereas here you're proceeding while not having that solution. So kind of what you're saying is that you don't know a productive way to proceed. And then in that context, you wrote stuff that you didn't consider productive. So, yeah, stuff that you can't see how it's productive isn't going to help. On the other hand, if you do think this stuff might be productive, then this is like a bit strongly worded and doesn't fit with it well.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um,
Okay, so why did you call his thing irrational? Like,
um,
was there a particular reason?
uh, yeah, so he's saying like, well, that's what the rest of the paragraph is explaining, I think. Um, in that like well, I guess it's unclear whether he means it's not correct as an example, like as an example it's incorrect, or whether it's like the example is wrong because he thinks the idea that the example is based on is wrong.
Okay, well then wouldn't you call it ambiguous?
Well, I thought it was only the second one when I wrote this. I didn't spot the first meaning.
Okay,
Um,
but then why did you think it was irrational?
because well, yeah, like to say that something's not an example because you think the content of the example is wrong, but the example is about like relationships. Those relationships don't depend on whether the example is like real or true or not. We just need to know what the relationship is.
So, are you saying that you think he made an error?
Uh, yes.
Okay, but what do you think irrational means?
Um, well, not rational. I mean, I think it's like it's
Okay, well,
making a
what's
decision.
rational then?
Well, making a decision. So rational, like making a decision based on like well-founded, um, ideas, either like logic or explanatory relationships or things like that. Like, well, I'm not satisfied with that answer.
Okay, that's not
So
the CR answer, and it's also not the less wrong answer. So that's
yeah,
gonna cause trouble.
um, I don't have a good answer for it, I think, at the moment. Um, so there are other things I could say that are sort of like involved in it, like statements. So like um, ignoring a problem without providing reasons or problem or disagreement or things like that, conflict without providing reasons is irrational. It's like ignoring things. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so the CR answer is that rationality is about error correction. It's about your methods of thinking rather than the results of your thinking. And the key issue is, do your methods allow for errors to be corrected? Do they help errors be corrected? Or do they disallow or make it harder for errors to be corrected? So if you're wrong, do you stay wrong? That's what irrationality is about. This differs from the answer you gave initially, which is fairly common, which claims that rationality is about correctness. It's about being right or being smart or being logical, like good object level traits in a way.
Yeah, no, my initial answer was like, I mean, if we were just talking about like logic, that like your chain of reasoning or whatever could be formalized as like, you know, a logical progression of propositions or something like that. Um, uh, yeah, so I can sort of see why that's an issue. Um,
So, on the one hand, there's associating rationality with correctness. On the other hand, associating it with processes that lead to correctness. Doing the right thing so that you make progress or improve over time.
yeah, um,
This is
yeah, sort of like,
also the less wrong position.
yeah, ways of thinking or thinking in ways. So methods is crucial there.
Yeah. So less wrong says rationality is the art of thinking in ways that result in accurate beliefs and good decisions. So they don't say error correction specifically, but they're saying use methods that lead to good results, such as correct beliefs rather than incorrect beliefs. So error correction is between the lines there.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's in the second paragraph, there's particularly at the end of the sentence, like achieving things previously unreachable. It's got this notion of progress, of improvement.
Yeah, these are all the like fuzzy, nice things that are associated with it. Your life can get better and you can be wiser and so on.
Yep.
Like curiosity is good, and the core concept is up here. It's about thinking in ways, or in other words, methods or processes
Yeah.
that get good results, rather than judging the results themselves. So if you think someone made an error, that's a bad result, which is a separate thing than the method that led to it. And it's not just the method that leads to it in the past, but like what happens next? Do they do postmortems? Is it possible for them to update their view? What leads to accurate beliefs or good ideas or whatever in the long run? So that's the methods that deal with updates or error correction or whatever, as well as the initial formation of the idea.
Yep. I get a corollary of this is like um, a statement in and of itself, like it could be logically flawed, but it's not like a statement can't be irrational. In that, if we're talking about like methods and things over time and whatever else, like the statement or a single thing is not an example of like a rationality. A rationality is a behavior of not having these methods or thinking in ways that are flawed or whatever else. Um, I can't really make that claim here because I don't know what methods he's using. And as he points out, he refuses to tell me.
Yeah. Well, if he answered that question, it wouldn't tell you in a relevant way. Um, like what school of thought someone has allegiance to or thinks they agree with or whatever is often doesn't correspond all that well to their actual thinking method.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I think based on the quality of the discussion, it's probably not possible to, or definitely I'm not in a position to claim that he's irrational or vice versa. Um, in that a quality discussion hasn't been high enough on either side to make a claim like that.
Okay, so in addition to using the word incorrectly and also using a word without having a clear enough idea of what it meant, this is also like aggressive or hostile or flaming. Like it doesn't seem designed to have a productive outcome. He's not going to say, "Oh, I'm irrational, my bad," and like learn something from it.
Yeah,
And then, yeah, the general thing with this paragraph is it's getting lost in details that aren't important enough. The discussion's getting too chaotic and too lost in minor parochial details. And even if you sort this out, it's many steps removed from the things that are actually important. And it's not worth sorting out. It would be easier to use a good, simple example than to fix this one and explain it and go through it.
yep. So, I mean, part of the thing that occurs to me as a problem is, uh, so I think, yeah, it's more clear that we both think that this conversation is about different things as it goes on. Like I'm trying to bring it back to a point, but the fact that we're not having productive discussion after this sort of indicates that I didn't do particularly well at that. Um, it's like at the end of this, I try and use what he said as the example, which I think doesn't work either.
Yeah, this one's also complicated and messy. It's going to be hard to make progress with
Yeah,
it. You should try to focus on making one or two relatively simple points successfully. And only when you have a track record of success do you scale up to doing harder things. Like, you need to back off to making simple enough messages that they work well and then scaling up rather than starting with like like 4 or so section messages with like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 paragraphs. It's trying to deal with like way too many things at once. A good discussion format that I recommend is you do 2 things at a time and each person picks one. So they write their post and they make their claims or whatever, and they also ask you one question or pick one thing they want you to respond to, and then you respond to their one thing, and also you say one thing of your own or ask them a question or say something you want them to answer or something. And then you can keep going back and forth where you each do one response of your choice and one response of their choice, which is so it's a little bit like there's 2 mini conversations where they're both going in small chunks, and you each control one of them. So you both get to do leading the conversation in order to try to make your point or focus on what you think is important. You both get to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, I've asked people to do this and they've been pretty receptive and found it reasonable.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of it's easy for people to agree with, and it doesn't like bias the conversation in one person's thing, like the the
Yeah.
person who posted the message, whatever else. And so that's good. People tend to like that, I think. Um,
Yeah, although I've had people yelling at me that using methods I propose is biasing the conversation and me controlling it, even if they're symmetric methods.
yeah. No, I mean, I can see that only from the point of view that you've had practice with those methods and they haven't. But it's not like these are
Yeah.
complex methods.
Yeah, but
It
also
doesn't feel like it.
I also routinely ask them if they have alternative methods they'd like to use instead, because I'm open to methods if they know of other ones that they think are good. I just don't want to use no stated methods by either of us.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe the one of the ways to introduce it is to break it. I'm not sure what your like how you usually introduce it, but that second point you made about like proposing methods, if the first proposition is to propose methods, then you say, well, I've got this one. Like they have an opportunity to come back and say like I don't have explicit methods, sort of thing.
Yeah, I
That
frequently
it's a bit
introduce
asynchronous.
that uh, in terms of we're talking about too many things at once. So I want to do so many things at the same time and have really long posts.
Mm. But yeah, so I think that's good. I'm gonna try and remember to try this. Um, should note it in. All right. So
Why is
if
why
oh
is
yeah,
this in
sorry.
bold?
Um, Uh, I sort of wanted to draw attention to something in there, because I wanted him to answer it. Um, I don't think I have a great reason. Um,
Yeah, if I want someone to answer something, I usually bold the question rather than
yeah,
the introduction that accuses them of being curious, which I think is meant as an insult. it's trying to imply that his story's not straight. You caught him in an inconsistency or problem, I think.
Yeah, no, that's probably that sounds pretty reasonable. I think yeah, I'm saying like, oh, look at this interesting thing. If you don't regard it as correct, then you know, what about probability? Um, yeah, so it is. It's trying to do that.
Okay, and then you have this question barrage, which uh, taking it one step at a time often works better. Maybe you feel rushed because the conversation's falling apart, so you might not have many steps left. But
Yeah,
I don't think this is going to save it if that's the problem situation.
no. I think it's just like a method of attacking him. I think was all I was doing there.
Okay, yeah. So you were trying to say something a minute ago?
Um, oh, I can't remember. It wasn't particularly important. I do have a question about this sort of thing though. Um, which is one thing I notice that sometimes I'll do this sort of thing where I'll put a whole bunch of questions like that sort of lead into each other. And part of the reason that I do that is so that I'm not typing one big thing. Like if you count yourself as a Bayesian, what probability did you assign to it being correct, and what do you assign generally to blah? Or like something like that, where I could put all this as one question, but it'd be really long and have like assumptions in the question. As it happens, because the other two questions lead on from the first one, and he said no, um, then the others don't sort of matter in the cycle.
Yeah, he
But yeah,
didn't
but
quite say no. I find his answer very, like, evasive.
mm,
Like, he might be a
which
Bayesian, he just doesn't want to count himself as a group member. It's hard to tell if he's objecting because he's something else, like a Popperian, or because he has a problem with tribalism. Like, he
yes, yeah,
accused you of saying, "Are you in a religion?" And he's like, "No, I'm an atheist. I don't join religions," which it doesn't. But what he could be thinking is, I'm an inductivist. Inductivism is not a religion. Wasn't he the one complaining that crit rats like stubbornly think all induction is wrong? That sounds like he
uh,
is an inductivist.
yeah. He's what was it like using stuff like uh claiming dogmatism or things like that. Um,
Yeah, by the way, he tries to like this is sort of an appeal to knowledge and expertise where he's like bringing up being on forums and having familiarity with me and reading an unspecified person's works. Um, but he spelled my name wrong, which like
yeah,
it seems kind of small, but if he actually participated on my forums much, he probably wouldn't spell my name wrong.
yeah. Um, though, like, I mean, it's ambiguous enough that he could have been talking about like Critical Cafe or something, or some other.
Right, that would count as not being on my forums and just having had like a little
Or
bit of a shared acquaintance.
he said hang out in the same forums as Curie, as opposed to like Curie's forums. Um,
Yes, there's various things that could mean. Like it could mean on PCS forums before I owned them.
yeah. Um, it strikes me as like oddly ambiguous. Um,
Yeah, he's trying to claim some sort of expertise, but he's being very vague about the details of what it is. And it's questionable enough to say, "Oh, I know a lot of stuff about this." Like that's not a very good message in general. But then on top of that, he's like hiding the actual specifics while trying to puff it up, is what it looks like.
yeah, one thing that I mentioned there as well, when I say like what he replies to, where like um, you haven't been interested in finding out what anyone else thinks, or something like that. Um, he quoted that bit particularly. Where was that? Oh yeah, no, right down the bottom here. Um,
Oh,
yeah, what I'm particularly saying there that I should have said is like what I think. Um, anything else? Things. Oh my God, how did I typo that so bad? That's awful. Wow. Okay. But yeah. So as maybe a like one of the times that he's done this, tags come back. So he said I didn't say that it was the PNC that was actually false. And I say I don't think there's any point talking about this. And then he says the point is that every claim. So he's actually like explaining and clarifying something here. The point is that every claim in general depends on assumptions. So in particular, crit rats don't have a disproof of induction that floats free of assumptions. If this was like a thing to reply to, or I was going to reply to, what's the
uh-huh.
how do I go like I've got an intuition of how I'd reply. Um,
Okay, well, start with brainstorming, I think. Like, what
okay,
are the things you might say?
so every claim depends on assumptions. You're making the point that crit rats don't have a disproof that is free of assumptions, but are there any proofs that are free of like assumptions? How does this help us get anywhere? Is I guess roughly what I'd say.
Yeah. Do you
Like
want to write
I'm
down your ideas?
yeah. So um, um, so I guess that's like the main threads of what I like my intuitive reply. I've actually thought about this more than I think I would if I just sat down and tried to reply. I wouldn't bother with this step, and my reply would have been worse for it. Um,
Yeah, I think it's important to start slow and gradual and go through all the steps, and then you can start skipping steps after you've had a lot of success and they get second nature
mm,
enough. But you don't want to skip steps when you're trying to practice.
yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know when it's safe to skip steps at the very least at the moment. Um, so yeah, so I mean, this
Okay,
last bit is really
so
the
next
yep.
question. Why did he write these two sentences? Like, what's his goal? What does he think his point is? What does he want you to take away from it?
So he's saying that there is a point to talk about this. and I think he's clarifying his point to essentially like so he thinks I have the wrong idea about his point, which is probably correct.
What's PNC again?
The principle of non-contradiction.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah. So uh, so he's saying everything has assumptions. I'm say something about contradiction. He says I didn't say that PNC was actually false. Or that's in part because what do I say? Because he's replying to something with that. Yeah, I say reality doesn't contradict itself, and this is coming on from the assumption that
Yeah, yeah.
contradictions are bad. So yeah, so I think he's actually trying to clarify his point here, in an attempt to convince me that there is a point in talking about this. Sort of, he hasn't said it explicitly, but that like part of it is like I've misunderstood him, and I've misunderstood why it would or wouldn't have a point or what it relates to. Um,
Okay. Do you have an overall map of like what's at stake or what's going on in the discussion? Just the very bare bones main points. Like what's his
mm,
position? What's your position? Like in very short, and then how does this statement relate to either one of them?
no, so I don't have a a tight map like that. I've just got the one in the background there. Um, yeah, part of the reason this feels a bit chaotic is that I don't quite know what his position is or what his points are. Um,
Right. Okay. So can you brainstorm what his position might be, and maybe what are your main questions about it?
so,
Or like what are the main gaps in it or holes where you can't figure out what he's trying to say or things? Or just, what parts of his position do you have? Like, you probably know at least something.
yeah, no, I think I do. Um, so, okay, what are his positions? So one of them, I think he thinks there are some issues with CR somewhere. Um, um, so yeah, he's definitely been saying that assumptions are significant. Um, um, so he's sort of with this, there's sort of an assertion that to disprove induction, I mean, I'm if you're saying like to disprove induction, it needs to be free of assumptions, but every claim in general depends on assumptions, sort of feels contradictory. So I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, but I thought he might have been saying you can't attack induction for making assumptions because everything makes assumptions. I thought the point might have been to defend induction by saying CR has the same problem, so it's not a problem. Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this seems I mean, isn't his argument against the criticism the same as then the argument against inductivism? like that induction is based on assumptions. Like, I mean, he's sort of implying like that the fact that there's no disproof of, I mean, this is not particularly criticizing critical rationalism, but it is criticizing the criticism of induction.
Yeah, I think he's trying to say assumptions are necessary. Okay, so
Um,
more broadly, you try to brainstorm different positions people have on assumptions and uh, how to deal with the problem that you can't like justify all of your assumptions, because if you justified one, then that would be an argument which would make more assumptions and you get an infinite regress. So what are like standard things people think we need to do or put up with?
um, well, yeah, so there's assumptions are necessary, though a contradiction means one is wrong, so we can improve. We can find common sense assumptions and just go from there. We can't get better than that. There's, the position that these are my assumptions and tough luck if you disagree, I'm not going to be unconvinced of them. There's a position that we're always going to have some contradictions, so we should ignore them. Uh, there's it's turtles all the way down. People sometimes
Yeah.
conclude nothing is right, or we'll just do it the best we can. There's if you have assumptions, it means your idea is wrong in general.
Okay, so another common one is to minimize how risky the assumptions are. You can find things that seem like really logically proven or self-justifying, or the most obvious things in the world, such as Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." He figured the fact that he thinks was like especially non-risky as a claim to reason
Yep,
from.
well, that sort of makes sense. As in, I think therefore I am seems reasonable. Seems self-evident. Low risk assumption. Yep.
Oh, I don't agree
Uh,
with that. You have to do things like define what existence is, and whether there are different types of existence, and how should you think about evidence, and how do you know it's real, and so on and so forth. And then when you do all of that, you've introduced all sorts of claims and explanations. It just gets complicated.
yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of implicit stuff in there that we sort of ignore because it's simple. It's because it's only 5 words type thing. But it's actually sort of implying a whole massive collection of stuff that might not be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So here you have some positions. Do you have any ideas which ones tag might believe or disbelieve?
So I'm not sure about the first one. Not sure about the second one. I don't think he agrees with the third one.
Okay.
Um, I don't think he agrees with the fourth one, but I do suspect that he might agree with some contradictions are always going to happen. So maybe there's another one here, like so like we're always going to have some contradictions, and so we can't know anything for sure. This I think he might agree with.
Hmm.
So I think he agrees with this part, but I don't know where to go from there. Maybe option one. That sort of
Okay.
lines up with we can't know for sure.
I doubt he
I
thinks nothing is right. Like, I don't think he's a skeptic.
Yeah,
They're pretty rare, and he wasn't signaling that kind of thing that I saw.
that's fair. Um, yeah, I guess these two things are related. Like we can't know anything for sure, and nothing is right. But one of them is about uncertainty, and the other is like, yeah, pretty hard line by comparison.
Oh, another
I
thing
s-
with minimizing the riskiness, you also do that by minimizing assumptions. Like you come up with a small number of foundations.
um, there. So another thing that maybe so this one I think might be something that he agrees with. Like for two people to agree on an argument based on assumptions, they need to agree on the assumptions.
Right. Okay. So this gives you like some rough sketch of what to look for. You can try to, when you talk to him or read his messages, figure out what sort of things he might believe, and you have some options. And you can try to match him up to the pre-existing categories you're aware of, or see that maybe he doesn't fit any of them and he's something else. You can try to figure out what's going on. So another thing you can do is you can figure out, okay, what position do you have? And then how does it differ from his?
Yeah. So I think that like contradictions are more important than he does apparently. Or it seems like that at the moment. Um,
I don't know. What did he say that makes it seem that way?
um, all the stuff about the principle of non-contradiction. Um,
Well, I think he was saying that for the specific purpose of
yeah, okay.
saying that you're imposing your framework's assumptions on the other framework that they might not agree with.
Yeah, okay. So if I made the point that uh, inductivism, so I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but um, if I was instead saying like inductivism thinks that contradictions are wrong, but this is a contradiction by their own rules, therefore that's bad. Um, I mean, what would he reply to that? Because he's sort of like not saying that. Like it's sort of interesting in that we're talking about whether like or some of this is talking about whether inductivism whether there's a problem deep in inductivism, and he's then saying that he's not necessarily an inductivist. Uh, how is it's sort of like how is he evaluating these ideas then? Um, because if he can move like shift his position then it's sort of like he can judge whether the contradiction for inductivism is right or not without like specifically saying how he's coming to that conclusion. Like, I don't know, it feels, because it's hard to pin his position down. I'm not sure how he's judging the ideas. Like whether yeah, like an internal contradiction in inductivism would be a problem or not. Like
I
I
think
sort of have
he'd
I have a
view it as a problem. I think he was merely saying that that's an assumption that not everyone logically is forced to share. He's trying to bring up a logical puzzle of how do you deal with people who disagree with you in major ways. He's trying to say that you don't have a solution to that puzzle. I think that's his main point. He thinks that you're trying to say you have the solution to an important problem in epistemology, and he's trying to tell you that the problem's harder than you realized, and that you haven't solved it.
yeah, okay. I wish you'd
One of
say
the things
that.
that hasn't happened in the discussion is you haven't really explained your solution in detail or like elaborated on how you think stuff works very much.
Yeah.
Partly because you haven't been clear on what he's trying to say. That's gotten in the way of moving things forward. He hasn't been very responsive to questions. And
Mm.
whenever he tries to clarify anything, it's like 2 sentences.
Which doesn't, yeah, particularly help me figure out his position.
Yeah, you could probably find someone to talk with who was more willing to try to explain what they meant.
Mm.
Certainly, there are people on FI who you could ask, like, hey, does anyone want to have a conversation and make an idea tree and debate something? And you could probably find someone who would have a bit more patience.
Mm. Oh yeah. No, definitely. But yeah. So one thing that I mean, I guess one of the things is going through this, it's sort of clear to me, or in terms of this, so just to put down my logic there, he's making a point about assumptions. So, and then, yeah, what are all the positions? So it feels like doing a lot of work for something that's ultimately like reasonable to expect of him to sort of be clear about his position. It feels like the best way to move forward would just be to like essentially say, I'm really unclear on your position. Do you mind stating what you think about critical rationalism, inductivism, and how they relate to each other and assumptions?
Yeah, I think that would be a completely reasonable comment. My guess is he'll say that's too much work and it's too broad of a question and not want to do it. And claim that you're having a more specific conversation than that.
Okay, yeah. So, what's this? Um, so if tag says uh, too much work, I'll comment. Then I guess I could say, well, the reply would be like, do you have material you think I should read? And what do you think the conversation, what's the like bounds of the conversation in your mind?
That's one approach. Like it's fairly goal dependent. Like if you think you're
Yeah.
not ready for this specific conversation, you want
Oh, no,
background
no, yeah.
material, that's fine.
Well, I don't think there's like, I mean, I think this has value in terms of me figuring out this sort of stuff, but in terms of realistically continuing it, I think, I've got more important things to do. This is, I should do more background stuff regardless. But yeah, figuring out what I would do otherwise, I think, is important. Yeah, okay. Now, if he replies to that saying that it's too much work, or is evasive and whatever else, then it's pretty clear that there's no point continuing. Because this is a pretty straightforward, easy sort of thing to do. Yeah. All right. Do you think there's much else we should talk about in terms of this thread?
Very briefly, I'll tell you one of the answers to what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Does this make sense?
Yes. Yep. No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so we don't just like pick some assumptions and say, okay, we're just going to assume this forever, and if we're wrong about it, we're screwed. CR tries to have a system where anything can be fixed if necessary.
Yep. One of the things that I like about this as well is that part of like that argument, one thing that I think Tag might disagree with is the in practice part. And you can sort of, and I think one of the like things that's very elegant about CR in general is that it's incredibly self-consistent in the way it sort of is constructed. So it's easy to use CR to analyze CR. So yeah, you can quite easily hold, the 95% of what that argument is without the in practice part, and then just look at the in practice part, which is good.
Yeah, so if our starting point sucks too much, then make some assumptions and never question them is certainly not going to work, because the problem is we have too many bad ideas to start with. So that would be a worse method. Whereas what we can say about this is at least it gives us a chance it might work.
Yep. Well, it gives us a way to argue against it as well, in that if you can show that this starting system doesn't, like that paragraph is basically a starting position, it seems to me. And so, yeah, if this starting system doesn't work with this method, then that would be, well, it would be showing an internal contradiction.
So by a starting position, what I had in mind is more like the totality of human knowledge, or at least a complete worldview, a complete
Okay.
position on like all the fields and everything. And this gives you a lot more flexibility, because the bigger it is, the bigger 5% can be. You can question large things at once because you have so many other things. It gives you
Yep.
many different like points of reference to think in terms of. So it gives you a lot more options. But I think we're safer with a big system where we know lots of things. And
Mhm.
we've seen that it seems to work. Like, we've made scientific progress, we've made mathematical progress, like we've got cell phones and spaceships, something's working. So it seems like we have some ideas that are good enough to make progress. So probably we can just question whichever ones are bad in terms of some of the ideas that are actually good, and we should be able to improve further.
Mm. Just thinking about this type of thing, and the idea of progress is, so say you take like a justificationist point of view with like justified true belief, and then you propose like a different system of epistemology, like critical rationalism, and like justify it well under the old system. I mean, it seems like a way of making progress. Particularly, I mean, I mention this because humanity made a lot of progress before Popper came around, sort of thing. Like Popper wasn't necessary for like the Enlightenment to happen, sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot of the debate between Popper and the inductivists is it's abstract and descriptive. He was trying to explain what people are doing explicitly. And the inductivists said, no, they're doing this. So there's a clash, like claims about what people are doing. But no one's claiming like you have to first know the abstract system before you can learn anything. They're just trying to describe what people actually do that works.
Yeah, yep.
And it makes some difference. Like if you're confused about what you're doing, it's harder.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. But yeah.
Anyways, if you get stuck, the other thing you can do is you can add more ideas to your system. You can add a lot more ideas and try things out and see if anything helps.
This is like the complete system that we're starting from?
Yeah. Like if you think you're stuck, you can brainstorm new ideas.
Yep. One thing that I was thinking about, in part from some of the stuff I posted the other day, and then in part from your post on the this one. So I feel like there's a problem with, two things sort of occur to me. One is that like if we start from a position of like if you have 5 ideas that might explain a thing, then they all have some probability of being correct. Let's say the person can estimate that at the time. As evidence comes up, like some of that evidence might disprove one. And I don't think that Bayesians I don't think many people sort of argue that something has a probability of being correct when there's like direct evidence that contradicts it.
Bayesians would say there's a small probability, which is the probability that the evidence is wrong.
Yeah. So I'm okay with that. As you come up with more and more ideas and as more and more evidence is generated, then more of the candidate ideas move to this like super low probability, sort of like close to zero. Practically, they're zero in that we don't really base decisions off them, but there is some non-zero probability or whatever.
Yeah, that depends. So roughly there's two main categories of ideas. So there's deterministic, aka polarized, sharp, or binary ideas. Predict 100% or 0% chance that the next bit in the sequence is 1. Right, so the idea is you have a data set and you plug it into the algorithm and then the algorithm predicts the next bit. And so some algorithms always predict either they're like it's definitely going to be a 1 or it's definitely going to be a 0. So these, when they get something wrong, they go to 0% probability or something near it if you want to take into account that the evidence or the framework could be wrong. But then there's probabilistic ideas. Predict only between 0 and 1, non-inclusive. Like they never predict 100% or 0%. They only predict things in the middle. And then you can also have mixed ideas and do either.
Yep. So as an example of the probabilistic ideas, I replied to some guy about hypotheses and not being able to combine hypotheses of equal probability or something. And anyway, I give this example of like flipping a coin and rolling a six-sided die, both with like 50%. So they're both purely probabilistic ideas in terms of predicting the next bit type thing. Um,
Yeah, you can't combine those in the sense of using both at the same time to predict the next bit. Because you only get to make one prediction.
okay, all right, yep.
But you can have an algorithm that like interprets which situation it's in and then has a case statement and says, if we're in the dice situation, run this algorithm and predict the bit, and if we're in a coin
So
situation, run this algorithm and predict.
you could have a uh, like an additional element to this that says like essentially it's able to deterministically predict which one of those is going to happen, like whether it's a dice roll or a coin flip, and then apply either of these two ideas to that as appropriate, like something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense.
Okay, yeah. So trying to get back to what you were talking about
Yep.
with ideas going to very low probability, that applies to these deterministic ideas or hypotheses or algorithms or whatever. However,
Yep.
the probabilistic ideas can get data wrong and retain probability that is not near zero. Like they can make wrong predictions and still have a high probability.
Yep. Um,
And so you
that
see
makes
that with like a fair coin prediction. It keeps predicting a 50% chance that the next flip is a 1, and it's wrong like half the time, and it still actually outperforms the other ideas.
yes, yep. Um, that makes sense to me. Um, the I think we make a deterministic thing out of that of like a combination of no program can get it better than 50%, and this one is optimal. Like that's an idea that's either right or wrong, right? That's
Yeah, the claim like, is this optimal? You could come
yeah.
up with a yes or no answer.
Um, so with that sort of thing, we've got things like so this guy said a hypothesis is a program which generates a complete prediction of all observations. Isn't the set of like observations infinite, really? Like we can just keep generating new and new ones and over more and more different sort of things. Um,
Yeah, they don't even claim that Solomon induction is computable.
yeah, okay. How it's useful then, I'm
They
not sure.
claim you can approximate it, but they don't actually write out clear explanations of like, here's what it says, here's our approximation, here's like various properties that we want an approximation to have, and here's our math showing that our approximation meets those properties, and here's an intuitive explanation of why our approximation makes sense, and here's the performance characteristics of our approximation. Like, there's nothing remotely like that that I've seen, which is what you would need to
Yeah.
do.
So even without that, the idea of like having all of this like so if you take like a partial sum, like you were adding up an infinite series or something with this, as the program sort of like figuring out and eliminating hypotheses and not others or whatever else. Um, in the limit, uh, essentially all but the correct idea are going to have infinitesimal probabilities, right? Um, why
So
would
that's part of what their weighting is for. They weight things so that the shorter ones have higher probabilities. So the non-normalized probability, prior probability before you roll anything out, equals 1 over 2 to the length of hypothesis.
length of the bit string? Yeah.
So if the bit string is a million long, then you get a non-infinitesimal, non-normalized prior probability. And I haven't actually seen anyone explain how you normalize it, because normally to normalize probabilities, you add them all up and then divide by the total, right? But if you divide by the total here, the total is infinity. So I
Yep.
think you would still have the infinitesimal problem, but they act like you don't and they've solved it. Whereas, because they literally will argue that if you say prior probability is everything is equal, that you have the infinitesimal problem or the everything is zero problem. But then they claim there solves it by giving higher probability to the shorter thing, so everything gets a particular amount of probability. But uh, when they talk about that, they're always talking about the non-normalized probabilities. So I actually don't know how it's supposed to work. But
So, yeah, one thing that occurs to me is that this seems unprincipled. The only way I can think of sort of arguing that it's okay-ish to use, or at least not wrong to use, is like essentially if you had a curve of this, then the area under the curve is 1. That would be like something that seems somewhat sensible. Um, oh, okay, and they've uh, essentially what they're doing here is they're adding up like half plus a quarter plus an eighth plus etc. As an infinite series and getting 1. Um,
no, they're not.
which no?
Because, no, it's not at all like that. So, uh, number of bits, number of bit strings. So, uh, we'll just start at 1. So how many different length 1 bit strings are there?
So yeah, so there's well there's 1. Sorry, there's 2.
Yeah,
Um,
there's 2. And how many length 2 bit strings are there?
4. Yeah, so it's number of permutations for that number of digits.
Okay, and then what's the
So,
probability, like this formula for this one?
um, so probability um, for each bit string, or for what's the probability of,
Yeah.
sorry?
Yeah, what's the probability that a single bit string of length 1, what's its prior non-normalized probability?
Oh,
This
so
formula.
half.
Yes, half.
Yeah, so the
Okay, and then this
half in
one?
both of them. Okay, and then so yeah, and that would be a quarter. So they each
Yep.
add up. So each set of or each set of bit strings of the same length, their non-normalized probabilities add to 1. I guess
Yep.
they do that because like ideas can be subsets of other ideas or whatever. Like you can add on NOPs or something. There's some. So the
Yeah,
total
so
then still ends up at infinite.
yes, it's very much infinite. They do say that not every bit string is a valid program. So you're going to have some exclusions, but I don't think that's going to solve this problem. It's there's plenty that are not excluded, so you're gonna run into infinity.
Also, just thinking from a computer science point of view, uh, I'm pretty sure you could write or you could design such a like a language such that every bit string is a valid program. Like we do that for other data encoding. A program is technically data encoded in some binary representation.
One of the things I saw said that they didn't want programs to be substrings of other programs. So one of the ways you can solve that is by having an end of program marker. And so anything that doesn't end with an end of program marker is not a valid bit string.
Um, uh, my feeling is that if you impose that, you end up with programs necessarily being like infinite length. Like if programs can't have other programs as their subset, then what's the smallest case? Um,
No, the point is just
well, okay, yeah. Anyway, um, the point is to like eliminate some of the options.
no, the point is to avoid ambiguity of parsing, I think.
Okay.
Um, like you have to, it's just having explicit terminators on the program lets you know that it's this one rather than something that has the same prefix.
Yeah. Okay. So just like C has like the null marker to terminate strings and etc. Um,
Yeah, I don't know exactly why they did that, but they have. Anyways, I think. But then the other thing is not all programs halt, so that's a problem.
mm,
You don't want to include those, and not all programs output valid answers. Like you could have a program that outputs 3,
yeah.
which is
Um,
not a valid prediction.
why did they bother with Turing completeness? That's where the halting problem comes from, presumably. But I don't know of a good reason to bother with Turing completeness. You can do everything, but you don't need Turing completeness to do all the useful stuff that we want to do.
Don't you? They want to be able to represent like anything interesting. So if you avoid Turing completeness, you're gonna like handicap your system dramatically.
Um, not necessarily. I mean, I need to look into this more, but I've heard like functional programmers talk about Turing completeness essentially because like Turing completeness is in like one way to look at it is it's a set of potential programs or the ability to compute the programs, but it deliberately includes like programs that don't halt. Um, so you could, for example, there might be problems with formulating a system behind it, but you could say like the set of all Turing complete or the set of all programs in a Turing complete system except those that don't halt. Like that's a non-Turing complete system now, and it's analyzable. Uh, yeah.
Well, you're doing that by literally special casing everything. Like it's a list of programs that are valid rather than a programming language. The normal way we deal with this stuff is we create tools like operators like plus or NAND, and then you're allowed to use those in combinations and write functions and have functions call each other and set variables and so on. And then when you take those tools, then you end up, oh, it does the same things a Turing machine can do. And then excluding all the ones that halt, like you can't just be like, well, I'm gonna remove the minus operator so we don't run into this halting problem. Like it's hard to figure out which ones won't halt, and it's hard to limit your language to avoid the halting problem.
Yeah, I suspect there's research in. So, I mean, you can do things like saying that all functions have to be total, um, for example, because I think when you have total functions everywhere, there's no halting problem. Um, and there's various like analyses. So in terms of stuff like systems that do stuff like theorem proving, um, like I think there's ways to create those systems such that they like are guaranteed to halt. Um, so anyway, yeah, I don't know enough about it, but
Oh,
languages like Idris or Coq or Ada come to mind as they
I'm,
particularly deal with this sort of stuff at a deep level.
I'm not
Anyway,
familiar with those particular claims. I assume the LessWrong people aren't either. That's probably part of what's going on, or they think it doesn't work. But they like the Turing machines because they want a universal system that they can compare program lengths in. They need like a measure, a standard basis, in order to figure out which one's more complicated. And um, there are proofs that Turing machines can translate between each other. So they say the problem of the basis doesn't matter that much because it's only constant overhead, which I think is a very bad answer.
it's
Um,
not true across all Turing machines. Like
yeah,
there's
yeah,
some
it is.
some Turing machines maybe, but well, I mean, you can have a like you could translate an algorithm that's finite in one machine to an algorithm that's infinite in another machine, like by virtue of the encoding changing.
I don't think
Um,
so. My understanding is that you basically make like a translator function and and you can do that in a fixed length to get from any one brain machine to another one.
so there's another assumption there about optimization of these things, that it should always be in the smallest possible thing. So
I'm
like an
not sure what
algorithm
you
that
mean.
an algorithm that like predicts the next number, for example, um, and it's just counting up indefinitely, like it starts at 1 and then just goes on forever. Um, one program to represent that is like a program that uses some sort of like plus function. Another one is just one that like has a hard-coded list of all the numbers, that being that the program is of infinite length. Um,
You seem to be talking about functions now rather than Turing machine. So Turing machine
Um,
is dealing with like what's the language rather than what algorithm are we using within the language.
yeah, okay. So there are, yeah, the reason I've sort of swapped to that is because it's an abstraction layer that's easier to reason about. Um,
Yeah, but I don't think it's the same issue.
no, okay, fair enough. I need to,
And
yeah,
my
think more about
understanding
that.
is that Turing complete, or like, isn't the definition, the reason we call all these Turing machines the same is because you can translate between them with constant overhead? That was like their defining characteristic.
Um, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure
A,
constant
a
overhead.
universal Turing machine means that it's only some sort of translation function away from doing anything that any other one can do.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if there are bounds on that overhead, like that are general across all Turing machines as opposed to between particular Turing machines.
No, you take any particular two, and then you can come up with a translation function that's only a constant. That's the idea.
Okay, I'm not positive about that, but it seems reasonable, I guess. Um, anyway, unwrapping the stack a bit, um, where I where I was going with the evidence and increasing evidence and infinitesimal probabilities and stuff. Um, so a few things occur to me. One of them is like the set of possible programs is infinite. Um, the all the wrong answers approach probability 0 and the correct one approaches probability 1. Um, I mean, approach, I'm even using that sort of term, but
Right, so that
like,
depends, like I was saying, because if you're dealing with probabilistic stuff, things can be wrong and not approach zero. However, if you're
um,
dealing with a deterministic system, then I think the deterministic algorithms will outperform the
okay,
probabilistic ones. And then it becomes interesting to look at just the deterministic ones and see what happens with them and compare them to
yeah.
each other.
So in terms of just the deterministic ones, um,
And then I think your
which I mean,
argument works better in that context.
yeah, in terms of just the deterministic ones, like I can sort of understand why they'd say that this like ends up after an infinite like process, it ends up with the right answer. Um, I'm sort of like, I'm okay with that for a tick. Uh, why would stopping halfway end up with a decent answer? Like, I don't think that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, I don't think it does. I've been trying to figure that out. And my understanding is if we're only looking at the deterministic ones, I don't know why anything would ever lose probability without going to zero. And I don't know why anything would ever pass something else without one of them going to zero. So I think you basically just have an ordered list, which is ordered by your prior, and then you cross things out, and then you never reorder anything. So you don't really converge on the answer except via this crossing out method, not by updating probabilities, which would cause reordering where the better ones outperform the worse ones.
yeah.
So I
Uh,
think this system just does nothing like the way they present it in the deterministic case.
you also can't predict which one you'll cross out because that would get you to the answer faster than the process does.
But you
Um,
cross them out as you get evidence.
yeah, and so you can't predict what evidence you're going to get, and you can't predict what you're going to cross out. So from an infinite set, you're crossing them out one at a time. Why would that mean that the thing at the front or,
Oh,
whatever
you're
the
not
first
crossing
one
them
that...
out one at a time.
Oh, okay, sorry. Even if you're crossing them out en masse. Um,
Yeah, you're crossing out approximately half of them every single time, right?
yeah, okay.
Like you get a
Um,
one, and approximately half of all theories would have predicted a one, right?
so what's half of accountable infinity?
Yeah, it's still infinity, right?
Um, yeah, like that. I don't think there's a measure there that they've proposed that makes sense. Um, because like I can see them proposing various methods for how you might cross stuff out, but then that would predict what you're going to cross out. Um, like in sort of like
Yeah,
take every second number as even numbers or whatever else, but then a rearrangement, obviously. There's lots of
yeah.
ways to see that.
They
Yeah.
don't seem to have any worked examples where they try to show that the math ever does what they want it to do. In like, they're not, here's our set of 8 theories, and here's a string of evidence, and here's what they predict, and here's how the updates go, and you can see how the system's converging on the answer. Like, I don't know of any demonstrations like that.
No. I think part of the problem, and this is like an issue with for them anyway, is I don't think we know how to encode ideas. Like we don't have a good way of doing that, so how would you possibly evaluate them?
Oh,
Um,
well, they don't care about that. They just write an algorithm that takes an input sequence of data and predicts the next item in the data sequence.
but
So it
that would be
doesn't
like
encode ideas. You can
trying
just
to
do it
create
with
an
bits.
it
It's
would be like
very
trying to create an
reductionist.
oh sorry, like trying to create an AGI with no theory of creativity or consciousness or anything else. Um, anyway, that's just facetious to say, but I thought it was funny.
Yeah, no, their system, if it worked, is equivalent to the Oracle and FOR that makes predictions. You just input
Yep.
a question in the form of here's my data, and then the answer is the best prediction given the data for the next thing in the sequence. And you would have an Oracle that does that. So it's a worse Oracle than the one in FOR. It's first of all unreliable because it makes like best predictions in some sense rather than perfect predictions. And the only questions you can ask it are what comes next in this data set.
So an interesting so just thinking about this, um, if we presume that like correct explanations are like involves symbolic stuff. Um, so like algebra or equations or relationships or things where you've got, blanks to fill stuff in and whatever else. Um, when we have those sort of explanations, they implicitly contain a whole bunch of other stuff. So like, for example, our axial tilt theory for seasons um, sort of implicitly has all this stuff about geometry and the way that like shapes move in space and conservation of angular momentum and all this sort of stuff sort of baked in. Um, so arguably the representation of a program to predict the season should have all of that stuff baked in. Um, I wonder if it's possible to show that for any given problem, that it's always possible to have a shorter program that either contains the answers or generates the answers via like a dumb method. Um, and that will always be both shorter and not refuted by any of the evidence that we bring up. Um,
Yes, so their claim is that if you have you can hard code the outputs into an algorithm. You can say uh, outputs equal return count data, input data, and make that the index to outputs. Yeah, you could do something like this. But their claim is every single prediction you're making here, you have to add 1 bit of data, so you're lowering the probability. And their idea is that something will be more efficient than that. Their idea is that the truth has a pattern to it. And if there's a pattern to it, you can write a more efficient program that doesn't just hard code all the data, but instead uses some sort of mathematical algorithm like, n+7.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that one doesn't make sense, but
Well, in this it would be like, yeah, like output 0, output 1, output 0, output, like something like that as a program to do it, and it can just loop like that. If we
right.
had
So if it
some,
was a recurring pattern, if it was this looped over and over, then this would be you could have a very efficient program that said, loop through these outputs. You take n and modulo it by 50 or whatever, and then you read from your looping data, and then that one's actually going to be a low number of bits to have that program, and it's going to outcompete something that hasn't recognized the pattern, so it just has the raw bit string, infinity times or whatever.
Yeah. Let's say we had an algorithm like, that we were trying to predict, like that the reality was, like 0, 1, 0, 1, etc. a million times, and then 3 zeros, and then repeat the pattern, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like we have some sort of thing like that. I mean, you're not going to find out that the short program was wrong for a very long time. There's other problems like increasing your resolution of measurement and things increases the set of input data, which like means that your programs need to be like larger and bigger and whatever else and contain fewer inaccuracies or whatever, which
Yeah,
means that like the correct answer then gets further away, like the program is like necessarily gets longer. I mean, it's sort of, yeah, it's hard to see why this is a sensible way of dealing with
I don't
things.
think it is sensible.
No, yeah, no, neither do I. Um, I guess, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to try and figure out what other people are thinking if you already think that it's wrong.
No, that's a thing you can do. You can set aside your problems with it and try to ask them about it and try to understand and see
Mm.
if they have any answers to your concerns. Like I've tried to do that a lot. The problem I find is that no one really wants to sit there and answer my questions and address criticisms. Like they don't have any representatives who will argue their case, and there's no like canonical places to get answers. It's all chaos, so you can't get like one coherent position out of them that anyone takes responsibility for. The problem to me
Yeah,
is not that it's like not promising or seems wrong or something. It's that there's no good ways to engage with it so that anything gets resolved.
yeah, yeah, which I think is a problem. Arguably, they should think so too because of the definition of rationality we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, they seem to think there's just not much you can do about it or something. Like you just do your best to pay attention to what seems promising. But that just means use your biased intuitions and judge by social status, more or less. Like they don't try to come up with objective methods to do that. They don't try to figure out how to do it efficiently rather than because they're always like, well, it's too much effort to answer all these people who have questions or criticisms. So instead of figuring out how to do it efficiently, they're just like, it's too much, so we'll just at our whim skip whatever we want.
Yeah. Um, yeah. No, there are obvious problems with that.
Yeah, it's not just them though. Like all, more or less, all the schools of thought are like that. They're all very hard to engage with, and
It's
yeah,
yeah, no, it occurs to me the pattern of like academia is sort of like you have to accept that a conversation is going on that has no explicit participants but happens in journals, and if you want to contribute to it, you just find stuff to reply to and publish some stuff, and then hope that someone replies to you. Like, but it might not be the people you replied to or whatever. Like that, yeah, seems to be the standard, which is bad.
yeah, a lot of stuff even published in journals just gets ignored. So there can be stuff that like someone refuted it decades ago in a journal article, and then no one answered that journal article. They just ignored it, and they just kept on. So that doesn't work very well. Stepping back though,
Yep.
I think talking about this stuff is skipping ahead in certain ways. It's like complicated stuff. I don't think you have like an urgent need to have a bunch of answers regarding it,
No.
and so I don't think it's the most efficient thing to do in general. Like you can do it a little to try to satisfy your curiosity or something, but in general, you'll benefit more from figuring out what you can do with a low error rate and doing some of that and expanding that. And what can you do where you can self-evaluate, are you getting it right? Like in a confident, accurate way. If you can expand on that, that's how you extend your reach of what things you can deal with. And when you keep like finding something appealing about sophisticated looking things, it like pulls you away from that process.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. No, I can see that. It is like the distraction of, yeah, sophisticated stuff or things like this, things like Solomon-Off induction. I overestimate my abilities with regards to this stuff.
Yeah, I'm doing it because I'm in a different problem situation, and also it's still very hard to talk to them or get anywhere with them for me. And like you can see in your tag discussion that like you have a lot of things to improve about just like any discussion, simple discussions. Like you have enough things to improve about discussion itself that if you try to at the same time do discussion plus hard topic, then you have two problems at the same time instead of one,
Yeah. Yep.
which is a lot harder to deal with. Like if you can break things down into parts and isolate what you're practicing or working on to only like one thing at a time, ideally. You know, the fewer the easier it is.
Yep. Yep.
It
Um,
like it means you have fewer if something goes wrong, you have fewer candidates for the source of the error. Fewer things you're doing at once, the easier it is to narrow down where the problem is.
yep.
And you get
Yeah, no, I get.
fewer problems caused by interactions between things rather than from a single thing.
Yeah, so which there are obviously bigger problems in the sense that you sort of have to solve two things at once to make sense of them. Uh, they're like supersets of the other problems, or
Yeah.
yeah, or subsets depending on how you think about it. But yeah, um, they're more specific. Um, no, that makes sense. So one of the questions that I was going to bring up, we sort of got a bit sidetracked, but maybe we can fit into 8 minutes, is about outlining bad sentences. So like when someone writes a sentence
Okay.
poorly,
Hold on a sec.
how
I had
to,
one more thing to
yeah,
say
sure.
before we switch, which
Yep.
is yeah, before you do something, I think it's good to think, what have I done that's similar that I was successful at? Like, what can I point at and say, okay, I've done something successfully that was 80% as hard as this or harder and is similar. And then that is a sign that you might be ready for it. Although, you know, it can be better to say I've done 10 things successfully in a row that were 80% as hard. But, you know, if even if you just have one, that's a lot better than zero. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Something I haven't really thought about, like when I tackle
Yeah.
problems.
Your notes are missing something. It has what have you done that's similar that you can point to, but also specifically that you succeeded at. You know, and it went really well and it worked out.
Yeah, it's like, yeah,
And then you can also look at this from the other way. Like this is from the perspective of I want to do X. What have I already done that's built up to it? You can also look at it as from the set of like, what have I succeeded at? And then what could I do next that would build on that? Like you can look at it from bottom up, building up.
yeah. Um, so like this tutoring is more like this way, the second way. Um, um, yeah, which I think this way, well, you can sort of reframe loftier goal-based stuff um, via like planning and indirection to be the second form, or like to be more like the second form. Um, I think.
I'm not sure what you meant.
So say, oh, I want to build a skyscraper, and then figuring out what all the X, Y, Zs are that you need to do well before that. Um, so as opposed to saying like, I want to build a skyscraper, can I do it? Because, and then saying like, oh, I've built like, several mid-rise buildings really successfully. Like you could put, like building a house and then building lots of mid-rise buildings and things like
Yeah,
that in a list
yeah,
of, yeah. You can sort of set out those things that you'd need to do first before you do the other one, and then you can approach it more from like this point of view of like, what is
yeah.
the, yeah.
Find a progression. You do have to be careful with breakpoints and discontinuities. Like it might turn out that when buildings reach a certain height, that you run into problems you weren't thinking about before. Like all of a sudden you have to deal with the wind makes the building sway, which was ignorable before.
Yep. Um, yeah, I think often wind is actually less of an issue the bigger you get, but like earthquakes would be something that does get more of an issue the bigger you get. Where like a small house doesn't have a problem in an earthquake, but a big building, immediately does. Um, yeah. So yeah, so you can't predict problems, so you need to well, I guess that's like, yeah, when you're trying, well, actually it works in everything. If like, the conjecture I can do this next, as well as like the conjecture I can do this because I've done this stuff before, both of those things can have problems that you can't predict.
Yeah, so this kind of progression method doesn't give you a guarantee, but it gives you a better chance. Like at least you've tried to pre-solve some of the problems that the project will have.
Um, so in terms of the outline stuff, we're what, 3 minutes to the hour, or 4 by your count, but your computer's count. But I don't think we're really going to have too much time to discuss it. But what I might do is I'll pick out some sentences that are problematic for next time. I do have where is it? Is it over here? Yeah. So I've like done most of the thing. I've gotten to like the last page and a half or so of the this document I'm trying to outline. I read through it the first time and like felt like I understood it reasonably well, which is why I chose it as a topic. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, but I can finish this off then, and that'll like at least let me, yeah, it's not half done that way, and I can pick out some examples of stuff that was problematic. Um, there's a lot of like, there's a few times I like turn long sentences into like, the idea is rather than depending on the economic and viability of taking control of a history, stakeholders are incentivized to agree on each extension because A, they're randomly chosen, and B and C, parenthetical long thing. So this is actually, I think this is one long sentence. That's atrocious.
Yeah, it does look like a big paragraph.
Um, it's not really that complicated in terms of the ideas once you know what it's talking about. But I'm also like somewhat concerned about this example because it's like technical in a field that I know you're not familiar with, but I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Um, or I
Yeah,
think you're not familiar with.
I can often follow things okay. Like I've dealt with a lot of fields that aren't my field before.
Yeah. Um, in terms of this stuff, I think it's a lot of it's based on economics. I mean, actually, if we went through like my outline and the thing as like a comparative, um, if that's going to be useful, then I think you'll pick up most of the, like a lot of this is like economic stuff, and although it's, I guess, partially computer science and cryptography, they're not complex relationships. Um, so I reckon you'd be able to pick it up just as we went through it, particularly with my outline. Um, that
Okay.
is like, yeah.
Did you finish up the grammar videos or look at any of the text?
No, no, no. Sorry, I haven't had much time to do that. Um, I've had a few appointments
Okay.
the past few days, but yeah,
Do
no,
do
that's
you still want to do that?
um, I'm definitely like I'm not prioritizing it. I do like in terms of the grammar videos. I mean, it's one of those things where I may as well. I've got like an hour or something left on the videos, and I often like put them on when like doing the dishwasher or something like that. So that makes sense. Um, I'm not
Okay.
sure. I guess yeah. In part, I'm not sure like how. like the effort to benefit ratio of going through and comparing to what other people have written in the past. I should at least skim it though. Yeah.
Yeah, you could skim some of them selectively. Um, okay, so do you think you have enough stuff to work on for next time, or do you need like more to do?
No, I think I have enough stuff. Particularly because like now
Okay.
that I've found my Kindle again and whatever else. In terms of like reading, and I want to get back at like finish off the choice as well. Just 'cause I'm like halfway through that and it feels like a
Oh, okay, yeah.
like
That's a
yeah.
bunch to do then.
And then I can focus on the weekend over. I've got some other stuff to do outside this, and then focus on like getting reading stuff sort of set and doing it repeatedly, getting that habit started. Cool. Yep. All right. Sweet.
Okay,
So
so see you next week.
yep. See you next week.